Hi, welcome back to the workshop for episode 15 of Great Guitar Build Off 2023. And in the last episode we glued some flamey maple veneer onto the two body wings of the guitar, and here you can see me kind of cleaning that up a little bit. First of all, I'm taking the bulk of it off with a scalpel, and then I'm just going around it with a fine carving file just to take the rest of it off. And then with that done, just a bit of sandpaper on the block just to clean it up finally and give us the finish that we're looking for. You need to be a little bit careful with this because it is quite delicate, especially around those edges. So a little bit of caution will go a long way on this job. And there are those two little wings all nicely trimmed up. The veneer's gone on very nicely. I did have to kind of just touch up a couple of little bits around the edge because it hadn't quite glued down properly, and it's really important that it is, because probably the next thing we're going to do to these is route for a binding, and if there's any kind of loose bits around this edge, they're likely to chip, so it all does need to be glued down really well. But I think I've got it. I think it is all good. I've got a very high quality binding cutter that I'm going to use when I get to this, and hopefully that should be enough for it not to chip out. We're only taking 1.5 mil out, so I think we should be fine with it. Now, in terms of the binding, when I initially thought of this design, the center section on the top of the guitar was going to be wenge, if we remember back that far. We've since changed that plan and it's going to remain this stripy affair. Now, the plan when we were doing the wenge center was that I was going to actually put some wenge binding on, but now we're not. I think that would just really be at odds with the rest of the design. So I'm going to do something a lot simpler than that, and I'm just going to put a standard cream plastic binding on this. My plan was I was actually going to make the wenge binding out of 3 layers of wenge veneer, which I have. And I think at some point I will actually do that on a build because I think it would be a good look. I just don't think it's going to work with what I have in mind for the rest of this. I'm not going to do it yet, so if you really do like the sound of that and you think it would be a horrible mistake not to do it, fight me in the comments, but I'm pretty sure that I will go with the plastic. But I want to leave this just to dry out a little bit longer, just to make sure we're not going to run into any issues. But while we're waiting for that to happen, there are a few jobs that need to be done to this central section of the guitar. In particular, I cut this neck a little bit on the fat side initially to make sure that we retain some kind of thickness to this neck while we're working on it, just so any movement can happen while there's enough meat on the neck for me to compensate. As it happens, this has remained absolutely dead straight. It's kind of what I expected because there's an awful lot of laminations in there, and the chances of something with that configuration moving are reduced, but just to be on the safe side, there was that extra meat on there should I need it. Now I'm pretty confident that I don't. We can kind of trim it out, and I've drawn roughly where I want to go. We also need to level off the back of this headstock. It's a little bit uneven from when we glued the wings on, and we need to kind of rough in this volute a lot better than it is. With that done, I then need to veneer the headstock. I'm hoping I've got enough cut big enough. Probably will have. First up, we need to get it trimmed down. Okay, so that's that kind of thinned down. That was actually a very awkward cut, and it's left me kind of quite a little bit of work to do on these transitions. I can get that on the bobbin sander, shouldn't be too much of a problem, but the issue I'm going to have is sending the back of here through the bobbin sander, because I need to use a fence, which means that I've only got one way I can feed this in, and unfortunately it needs to go in that way, and it's just not very stable. That is going to move around all over the place, and I also want to make sure that I'm getting these transitions nice and square across the neck. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this up on a little backer board, which I will fasten to the headstock, and luckily, because of the configuration of the center section of the body down here, this, just when it's sat on the bench, sits kind of nice and square. I've just marked a line on there just to demonstrate that, and that's pretty much spot on. So I can just fasten this on with some super glue and masking tape, and that will just keep everything at the right angle as I get this through the bobbin sander. So we'll get that stuck on, break out the sander. Okay, so there's the spindle sander setup. I always say this whenever I use this machine in this configuration, but it does bear repeating. The drum spins this way. So if I have the fence set up and put my wood in from this direction, the drum is going to be pushing back. If I were to set my fence on this side, the drum would be pulling the workpiece in. And what tends to happen in that situation is that it will grab your workpiece and send it flying across the workshop at very high velocity into whatever or whoever is standing on the other side. So it's really, really important that you set your fence on the left-hand side if the drum turns that way, which I believe they all do. So with that out of the way, we'll just crack on with the sanding. Okay, so there's the bulk of the cleaning up done on the back. There's still a little bit of unevenness that the bobbin sander's put in, but it's kind of only very slight, and it's kind of scorched the wood a little bit in a couple of places. So I'll need to sand this by hand now just to get it down to an acceptable finish, but that is pretty much where we need everything to be. So next up we need to repeat the same trick and just take out these little sections here and here at the heel. But we can probably do these freehand quite easily. Okay, so I've pushed ahead a little bit with this, and I've cut myself a little piece of veneer, and I've also made a caul to match the headstock and a little bit of foam. And after I did the last lot of veneering, regular viewer Tim suggested using a foam roller to apply the glue. And as you can see, it does apply the glue very nice and evenly. So with that done, we can just get some clamps on it. And there it is, all clamped up. I've put plenty of pressure on, and if you can see on the back, but the foam has actually pushed the veneer right over at the edges, so it's almost folding over, which means it'll be nicely adhered to the sides, which is great. So I'm going to leave that overnight now because it's getting quite late. We'll come back tomorrow evening, we'll get this unclamped and get it trimmed off and see what it looks like. Okay, so that's the veneer on. All I've got to do now is just trim this down to where the back of the nut's going to be. I've deliberately kind of kept it a little bit long, and it's also not stuck down properly there because obviously the angle changes. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of line that up with my nut line. I'm going to put a pencil line on there. And I think I'm going to try and set this up with a sliding bevel so that we've got the actual angle we need locked in. And I'm actually going to cut this quite long to start with. And just work my way back, taking off a little bit at a time. A little bit long still. And that is pretty much spot on, and that's pretty good. I might have to relieve it just a little bit further because you never know, finishing this could kind of move that line a little bit further this way, which of course means we wouldn't be able to get our nut in between the fretboard and the veneer, but that's something I can kind of sort out and finalize as we get nearer to the finishing process. But I actually think that headstock is going to look absolutely lovely now, and it kind of juxtaposes against those kind of stripy bits on the side, and then you've got the the full-on stripiness on the back, which of course will look a lot better once we clean it up properly. Doesn't look like we've accomplished a huge amount in this episode, but these little jobs all kind of add up and move us towards the finish line, so I'm happy with what we've achieved this episode. Next up, I think we'll look at binding those two body wings, and then I'm just going to have to bite the bullet and start looking at the templates and everything else for getting this tremolo system installed. But that's for future episodes, so I'll leave this one here. Be back in a couple of days' time with those body wings and the bindings. Until then, smash that like button if you've enjoyed this, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I'll look forward to seeing you then. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.